Today I want to do a quick video to help troubleshoot importing Gcode into Blender. One of the first videos I produced was how I'm using Nozzleboss. I'm actually not entirely sure what his name is. I've been using his plugin for designing in Blender to create non-planar layer lines without using Grasshopper or Rhino. You can get the plugin from his, this is his name. I can't pronounce it. Heinz Lo. I'm not going to try, sorry. You can download his plugin from his GitHub. A quick recap of what Nozzleboss does when you've installed it. It's a plugin that gives you a tab on Blender sidebar where you can import Gcode directly into Blender. Once you've imported it, you can sculpt, then export it again. And then when you export it, your sculpting has affected the Gcode. See here, where the sculpting has affected the layer lines, it's increased the volumetric flow rate, thickening the lines so that compensates for the movements you create in your sculpt to adjust the Gcode so it fills it in correctly. That's basically what Nozzleboss does. Since I posted that first video, I've been contacted a few times with people who've got some problems importing Gcode. I think they've done it correct and it looks correct. There's still something missing that's meaning it's not going to work. If you've got problems with your Gcode, what I use almost always is Prusa Slicer. And if you drag your Gcode directly into Prusa Slicer, it'll open up the Gcode preview and you can see what Prusa Slicer thinks your Gcode's doing. I think because this was sliced in Prusa Slicer, it can identify the different wall types and stuff like that as well. Something you've imported from Blender, it won't be able to tell the wall types because it won't be marked in the export file. What I like doing is I like switching on the travel and I use the height, and you can see here instantly that there's two heights. There's a 1 mm and there's a 0.2 mm. Where's the 0.2? And it's this lead in here. This lead in is a different layer height. So when it's imported into Blender, Nozzleboss assumes that the layer height that you want is 0.2 because it looks for the first line and looks for how far it starts from the 0 position. Obviously this is not correct. Most of it is 1 mm high. If you've got access to the settings, you can always remove the wall around the print as well if you want, because that's usually not necessary. But it's not causing errors in the print. This is what's causing errors. So how you find the line that you want to delete or edit, scroll back to the point where it actually prints the line. This bit here is printing the line. So what code is it executing? This here, intro line. Okay, so it's quite easy to find because it's been marked as intro line. So you could either disable the setting that produces this intro line, or for this code, once you've got it, you can just delete those two intro line. It'll probably import correctly. So if I go to open up the code in VS Code. VS Code is quite good for editing the Gcode directly, and I can go back here and even find the exact line. So it's 223 and 224. So I can go here to 223 and 224, intro line and intro line. So rather than delete them, we can just put a semicolon in front to comment them out. And I can save the file and go back to the preview window and I can just reload. Now you can see that everything's blue. It's only got a 1 mm layer height and this lead in here has disappeared. So it was a correct fix. One other example that I had that was a bit strange, trying to import it. It looks fine to begin with. It looks like, okay, great. It looks like a perfect model. Then you tab into it and you realize that all the lines are overlapping and it's not really clear what's going on. So if I drag this one into the preview, Cura has done a better preview job than when Blender imported it, because Blender's not quite as clever as Cura when it comes to opening Gcode. But you've got an 11 mm layer height for the base and then a 1.5 mm layer height for the rest of the object. So what's going on at the base? Let's scroll down to the base and see what's happened. Scroll back to the point where it starts that line. You can see here it's got Z 1.5. So the intention here is to move the extruder to 1.5 above the build plate, I presume. But why is it such a thick layer then? Go back through the Gcode a bit and see what's caused that to happen. Doesn't seem to be anything. As you get up to here, yeah, this is where it is. G92, current position to 000. And if you look through all these, it's moving it around, but it's moving it around from 000. And what is the current position? If you move up one more, it's Z10. So we've moved the Z-axis to 10 mm above the build plate. Obviously, if you reset it to 0 while it's at 10 mm, and then you lift it up to 1.5 mm here and start extruding, you've got the 11 mm layer height. Sometimes you have to Google what the Gcode means. This is quite nice where it's got the comments after the Gcode that tells you what it's doing. But often there isn't one. But if you type G92 Gcode into Google, it will probably come up with a reset position or whatever it does. So I want to fix that. Open up Gcode, open up the Gcode in the slicer. What line is it on? 28. Set position to 0. So if I comment that out, because I don't know why it's resetting to 0, and save it, come back here, reload from disk. It's all gone blue, so that looks right, other than I did see a jump, and what you notice is that it's placed the Gcode with the center of the Gcode over the center of the 000 position of the build plate, which is not what you want. That gives me a clue about what that code was doing, why it had reset it to 000. Its point was to move the offset from the 000 position of the build plate to the center of the build plate. So that's why it was doing it. Now I've commented out that line, it's no longer moving the object to the correct position on the build plate. So that wasn't what I wanted to do. So if I go back to my Gcode, what I am thinking, I want the X and Y position to be moved because that seemed to be correct. But I didn't want the Z position to be moved. What I can do is uncomment this line and I just add 10 back there. So it's reset the X and Y position to 0, but it's set the Z position to 10, which was what it was already at. So that should mean, if I save it, it's not printing right on the corner of the build plate, it's printing here. These zigzag lines show that Prusa Slicer doesn't know how big your build plate is. So it's measuring the coordinates from the XY position along this axis, and then it's up to you to guess how big the actual build plate is because it can't get those details from the Gcode. It looks like it should be correct. This is the incorrect one. So I'll delete that and I'll import it again. Each layer is 1.5. This is the method I use for double checking my Gcode. I use it a lot, especially when I'm exporting from Blender to send to the printer, because there's a lot of things you could do wrong in Blender because you're doing it manually. There's a lot of things you could miss. This is a good example of what I was talking about. That final move here seems to want to rehome back to the origin on all axes. So it's going to smash through the print at this point here, because I think it must be going from the top layer. Yeah, you can see here, it starts here and goes straight through. So this is one of the things you've always got to watch out for if you're designing your model in Blender and exporting, because move like that at the end, you're a bit screwed. So where is that coming from? Open up the text editor in Blender, text file, end. It's got this home at the end. So actually I don't want this. If I re-export that now, reopen it again. So the last thing it does is just moves a little bit sideways. There's no home back to the build plate, which is going to smash the print. It's always good to import it into Prusa Slicer and have a look at it first, and make sure you switch on the travel as well. But the main thing is get the height and scroll through to find out which bits of the code are causing the problems. Even though Prusa Slicer is much faster at slicing, I still mostly like to use Cura when I'm slicing Gcode to import into Blender. And that's for one little quirk. For example, so if I add a cylinder in Cura and I slice it, you can see that it's sliced nicely, looks good. If I import that into Blender, it's exactly as you expect. You still have got to adjust the top and bottom if you don't want them to over extrude. In fact, the bottom's probably all right as it is. That was quite simple, that worked nicely. If I do the same thing in Prusa Slicer, slice that one, you can see there's these weird volumetric flow rate previews here, which I'm not sure whether they cause an effect, but it does look a little bit suspicious that you'll have a few blobs on your spiral, even though it is one long spiral. So if I export this Gcode, import, you've noticed Prusa doesn't segment its sections 100% neatly. They work fine, but when you try and do a pattern on it using checker deselect, if I select one, select link, checker deselect, section length is not even all the way along. It's unpredictable. Sometimes it can produce some quite fun results, but they're not uniform. You can see there's these waves running through them. Cura slices in a more uniform way. If you're sculpting it, you won't make any difference. But if you want to add a pattern to it, it works a lot better if you export in Cura. I always use Prusa when I'm checking my Gcode because its Gcode preview is much faster. If I want to slice a cylinder, I'll probably use Cura. That said, I've been developing the geometry nodes, which I use that mostly now. I started making more complex models, and it got time consuming making your model first, slicing it, bringing it in, and then editing it. So what I have been doing recently is I've been using a geometry node setup. I've got a base maker, so I can add my layer height 1.5, and I can add the base layers 4. That makes the base of my Gcode straight away without me actually having to import anything. Duplicate that. I'll switch this node over to the wall maker and bring up the object. Just choose how many layers I want. So now I've got the base and the wall as two separate objects that have been created with geometry nodes, and I can change the height of each one. I can change the width I've got a stitch maker as well, which is, rather than using my checker deselect, which I was using before, it's much easier for me to create patterns and control them procedurally rather than having to checker deselect and do it and then decide whether I don't like it or not. Because I've done it myself in geometry nodes, I can control the start and end of each line. Rather than showing how to line up the final layer as accurately as possible after you've imported it using Nozzleboss, this does it automatically. It'll also do the same for the start there. If you want to have a go on them, I've stuck them on my Patreon, so if you subscribe to that, which I'd be very grateful for, you can download a start file that got all these and video explaining how I use it.